welcome to another episode of Exploring Standards. I am your host, Jess, and today I'm welcoming on the show Rob Lowe. Rob, how are you today?
I'm very good, thank you. Can't complain. Lovely weather. How about yourself?
Yes, good weather, which always makes me smile. I love a bit of sunshine. So today we are discussing ISO 22716. But as always, before we really get into our topic, I do like to ask my guests, tell us a bit more about yourself and some of your experience with the standard as well.
So yeah, my name is Rob Lowe, not to be confused with the actor of a similar name. My background is pretty much the last 20-ish years within quality, predominantly within the personal care and household industry. So bleaches, toilet blocks, laundry, personal care, high risk, low risk, ins and outs, smattering of pharmaceuticals, some food. But yeah, I've done a lot. So my general background is quality lab, then raising myself up into supervisory levels, then quality management, then head of quality, and then jumping around as most people do when they're in the quality world. And then from that, I kind of realized I had a niche for building systems and understanding the frameworks around that and how they all interact. So I then started taking on interim roles as an employee. And then I got recognized by an auditor back in 2021 for my work, and she decided to bring me on as a subcontractor. And ever since then, I've owned my own business, operated my own clients, as well as worked for certification bodies as a certification auditor, as a first-party internal auditor, consultant, and software developer.
Just to name a few.
I know. I get very busy. I get very bored easily as well.
I know that actually. Yeah, definitely. Okay. So let's get into our topic today. So as I said, it is ISO 22716. Can you please give us a brief overview of the standard?
So 22716 or 22716, however you wish to pronounce it, or anything in between, basically is a good manufacturing practice guideline document around production control, storage, and shipment of cosmetic products. It goes around the people documentation, just as you would any kind of normal 9001 quality management system. However, this is very specific to the manufacture of cosmetic products. So where some standards may be generic in expecting you to work out what the controls are and what the risks are, this standard tells you what the risks are and how to manage them. So it goes into more specific control management and more process management.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I just want to highlight something. You said it was a guideline standard, so it's not certifiable. Is that correct?
So it is certifiable, but it's rarely. So this is the standards wording. So it's actually guidelines for the production, control, storage, and shipment of cosmetic products. This is what is actively written within the document. It is certifiable. However, there are very few certification bodies that are accredited to certify it. So I work for a couple of certification bodies, one of which is not a certified standard. The other, it is not an accredited standard. The other, it is an accredited standard through an accreditation body. So you get a very different feel for how that is managed internally. But it's totally certifiable, and it's probably one of the main sources of evidence in this day and age with regards to some legislative requirements for showing GMP management, specifically in America at the moment with MOCRA. A lot of people are jumping on the 22716 bandwagon because it's just an easier way of getting into the market.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you for making that sort of definition, because obviously it does all get a little bit confusing.
Very.
Yeah. So what are some of the benefits of 22716?
So 22716 is there's a plethora of benefits, if I'm being completely honest. If you think about what the products are that you're producing, they are products that are going onto the human body. They're cosmetics for human use, consumption, shall we say. So when you produce these products, you want to make sure that you're producing them in an environment and a manner that is going to control the risk, because the alternative just doesn't bear thinking. I mean, they can go from it smells horrible all the way to it's caused a serious undesirable effect on a human being and they've got a rash or they've got to go to hospital. So by having this framework in place within your business, it allows you to, first of all, try and mitigate those risks and bring them down to an acceptable level. It ensures traceability. So in the unwanted but potential event of a product recall, you are more than equipped to manage that appropriately and timely without any kind of confusion or mismanagement or anything of that nature. And then it also, if something does go wrong, you're able, like it's a complaint, for example, it allows you to investigate that appropriately. I've seen a lot of businesses where I've gone in for the first time where they'll have a GMP system, so to speak. Their system is undocumented, it's inconsistent, but it works for them because they've never had an issue. But you raise that question, what would happen if? And there's just no real answer that would satisfy you. And then if you think about a court of law, having this in place and having all this evidence that you can submit is an excellent due diligence process. So it could potentially, from a business point of view, keep them out of any kind of legal issue at the same time. So there are huge benefits. But if I was kind of taking away the lower hanging fruit, it would be around traceability, risk management, and mitigation, and having a site that is consistently producing high quality products.
Okay, yeah, that makes so much sense. I mean, obviously, as you said, a lot of time nothing will go wrong, but are you prepared if something does go wrong? And the risks, obviously, in this industry can be severe, and it's just not worth it, is it?
No, and I always attest it to, I don't plan on having a car crash when I drive my car, but I'm still going to make sure the brakes are sorted. I'm still going to wear a seatbelt. I'm still going to do all that work, because if it does happen, I'm going to protect myself.
Yeah, no, totally. I love that little analogy. Okay, so you've already talked about GMP already, but what is the difference between ISO 22716 and GMP?
So the difference is huge, if I'm being completely honest. The GMP is just the standardized phraseology for good manufacturing practices. Now, in and of itself, it means making sure something's good quality, made within an environment that's safe to produce that. It doesn't really mean anything beyond that. It's when you start applying it to specific industries, it's when it starts to take on a life of its own. So if you think of things like the pharmaceutical industry, they have CGMP, and that is a certifiable standard. I believe in this country, in UK, there's the MHRA that would look at that CGMP. There's the FDA in America, they would look at that as well. So some regulatory bodies have their own specific requirements. And then obviously you got like food as well. There's loads of different interpretations depending on the application. So when you then go cosmetics GMP, 22716, it is, as I said, very specifically tailored to the risks of the products that are being produced. And it's important to note that the 22716 standard only concerns itself with the manufacture of products that are for human use only. So if you think about pet care, technically this standard doesn't consider that a cosmetic, which I disagree with, because my animals are part of the family, and I'd like to know that the products going on their body is just as well controlled as the ones going on mine. So there are some limitations to what this standard looks for, but 2716 GMP is very prescriptive, very much. For example, when materials come in, you need to do this, this, and this. If you have water for the manufacture of the product, you need to control it this way. If you have then a manufacturing element to your business, so manufacturing and production mean two different things in this case. Manufacturing means taking the chemicals, the fragrances, the dyes, blending them up to get that fill content, and then shifting to production is when you fill it and you pack it off. So it's two very different areas that are all process staged. So it pretty much runs your workflow and tells you how to do what you need to do. So you couldn't necessarily pick up a food GMP and apply it. You could, but you'd probably get a bit over and above, if that's being completely fair. Like if someone drops on the floor, throw it in the bin. Well, if it's a bottle, maybe you can wipe it down, clean it. Maybe it does need to go in the bin, depending on how clean your floors are. So it's very industry specific in terms of the difference. So GMP is a very generalized phrase, whereas 22716 is very much fixed to a specific production of products.
Okay, and I think that's kind of then what brings out the biggest benefit, as you were just explaining before. So who needs this standard, and what kind of companies are asking for it?
So at the moment, there are, as I said, huge uptake with regards to some legislative changes in America, United States of America at the moment. So they've introduced something called MOCRA. MOCRA is the Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act. And what this pretty much means is that the United States of America is being dragged into the 21st century with regards to the regulation and legislation. If you wanted to kind of benchmark it, there's an EU one, which is 1223/2009, which is pretty much what Mokra is doing. And it's just making sure that people are finally producing cosmetics in a well-manufactured way, such as having GMP on site. So one of the easiest possible ways for them to do that is to go looking for a 22716 certification. Obviously, they have to implement it because you can't just ask for it and then you get a handwritten piece of paper that says, well done. You have to do the work, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your needs. Other industries, which are ones that I've experienced, so I know I said it's for human contact cosmetics. However, there are strangely a couple of exceptions. So I've audited and certified under a certification body raw material manufacturing for the express use in a cosmetic. So this facility itself was manufacturing a whole range of other things, but this one particular product was there. They needed the 22716, so the certification body came in, they wrote the scope, and we audited against that particular product. Some other ones as well would be things like if you're just handling cosmetics, you may wish to have the certification because you wouldn't necessarily look at the manufacturing and the filling side of things, but you would still be taking raw material, you would be taking intake, and then you would be looking at management of that final product, traceability, dispatch and release. So there are a large number of elements that would still be applicable. That you just have to say, we're not blending, we're not filling, we're just finished product management and storage. So there are a large number of different business models that are looking at 22716. And as I said, because of Mokra, I'm inundated with work because there is no other framework that is as specific out there in the general public. There is as specific as 22716. Some people might do 9001. Unfortunately, it's just not good enough. It's not accepted, and therefore it's potentially a wasted exercise unless they want to stage themselves into it. But if they don't, they want to get products sold, they really need to just jump onto the 22716 and realize what needs to be done and implement it.
Okay, it's really interesting about sort of the movement that's happening now because of Mokra. So thank you very much for that. So one thing to note, though, obviously the standard actually hasn't been updated in a while. So is it still relevant, or what are the plans to update it?
So it's still relevant. There's no question around that. It's absolutely relevant today as it was back in 2007 when it was implemented. The difference being is that the world has changed. So where I say it's still relevant, there's a real need to update it, to be honest with you. A lot of auditors that I speak to, a lot of clients that I speak to and sites, they're all kind of asking for, like, is there anything else out there? Because, or how can we change and update this and bring it into the modern world? Because let's say 5 years ago, it was a different world. Now we're talking, almost 20 years ago now. So you can imagine how different things are. I mean, the standard refers to signatures. People don't really sign things anymore because it was predominantly operating on a paper-based system. There are some elements in there around backups and digital systems, but very, very minor. So if auditors were to audit to the letter of the wording in the standard, they wouldn't really be certifying a lot of companies because things like signatures, we now interpret that as an initial on a document or on a computer screen or something. But if someone went, no, I want a paper actual signature, it gets a bit confusing. So we tend to kind of work within the current framework of today's world when we audit their standard. Now, having said that, I don't see ISO updating it anytime soon. There's nothing on the horizon that I'm personally aware of. And I've spoken to, again, a lot of auditors, and they're not aware of anything. So back in early February, I decided to take it upon myself to develop my own version of the standard. It's completely my own work. It's built off of the principles of the 22716, 22715, the FDA. There's a Chinese GMP regulation. There's loads of those things that are kind of pushed into it, like BRCGS as well, so that there is a free-to-use resource out there that is written in human English so that people can understand how to interpret the guidelines. and it's color coded throughout as well. And it's also written in a format that is the specific format in which to implement it, so to speak. So a lot of standards out there, they tend to work in here's the Annex SL approach with most of the general standards. But people then don't quite realize how things are connected and how they should be implemented together. So it's implement that check, implement that check. It doesn't quite work like that, whereas this standard does. So I call it COS GMP purely because it's simple and snappy. But it's written very much in that linear implementation process. And then I've also developed a checklist for people to implement. So it's a really, really, really good evolutionary version of a standard that already exists out there. And as I said, it's completely free, so I don't charge anybody, and it's all my own work, so they're free to have it, use it, implement it as they see fit. And then there are only a few changes that they would have to make to be 22716 compliant. And that's things around, I don't always see the need for retains, whereas there's a fundamental demand for that in the 2716. So I've been to places where they've gone, we make 10-litre containers and we'll do one run every day. So you're telling us we need to keep 365 10-litre containers of hydrogen peroxide hair bleach. We're not allowed. It's not safe for us to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I reword it to the point where we're legally safe to do so, just specifically because it's more in line, and again, it's easier to interpret. But those are my own differences because I've audited and I understand realistically what should and shouldn't be done.
Mm-hmm. That makes total sense. I mean, very exciting, obviously, that the sound that you produce, and we can pop a link in the show notes for our listeners so they can find that for everybody. Very interesting that obviously the standard isn't actually being updated. I said 2007 is a long time ago. But yeah, very, very interesting stuff. So thank you very much. Okay, so going into our final question, and that is, do you have any top tips for those who are looking to implement 22716?
Yes. So for me, whenever I go to a site that's asking that exact same question, how do we do this? What's the best way of doing it? First thing I always say is, obviously, you need to get senior management on board. Don't overlook them. It's their standard. It's not the quality managers or the technical managers. It starts at the very top. So get them involved in every step of the way. Make them approve all the documents. They don't necessarily have to implement. They don't have to do the job. They need to be aware of what their responsibilities are. Second thing, and I feel this is probably the most important, is the standard is built over 17 sections, with 15 of which being actually auditable. Start at section 17. Section 17, at the very bottom of the document, is the documentation side of things. So those familiar with 9001, 14, 45, they're looking at section 7.5, which is that documentational information. So section 17, implement what your procedures will look like, implement what your template system will look like, how you'll actually do that, because it's very difficult to start your way through the document and work at, say, section 3, which is people and training records. You can't really do training records until you figured out the procedures and so on and so forth. So if you've understood what your policies will look like, as in the framework and structure, and your procedures and your working instructions, whatever format you choose to use, you can then build that system of, right, we now have the framework, the foundation in place. Then from that, we can now start distributing out the documents to the relevant personnel so that they can write them. We can come back to us, we can finesse it. We can then, off the procedure, create the training record on the competency assessment. And then from that, you've now got a really, really, really good starting point. There's a load of other things around it, but I would always say start at section 17, get senior management involved, and then proceed forward.
Thank you so much. I think our listeners are going to really appreciate that, because not many people are going to think, let's go to the end first, because it just doesn't make sense.
Exactly. I know, exactly. And coming from an audit perspective, you can tell when people don't know that, because you're looking at documents and you think every document looks completely different. There's no consistency. So it just brings these red flags up, and you just start questioning things in a way that you wouldn't have done had the documents looked consistent.
Mm-hmm.
So it just makes the process easier on everybody if you start at 17.
Okay, that's fantastic to know. Obviously, as well, if you're listening to this episode and you're thinking, gosh, this all just sounds a lot, I said, Rob, ourselves, we can all help we can help you at any stage of the journey. Reach out to us, and we can answer any questions that you have. And that is it for our episode today. Rob, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It's been absolutely fantastic, very informative for our listeners. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And that is it. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you have enjoyed it, please make sure you rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the channel. And I'll be back with another episode in a couple of weeks.